The Nile is no longer the longest river in the world. It is now the longest American territory in Africa. Millions of alligators have done what no human empire or modern military ever could. They have seized the heart of a continent and turned the cradle of humanity into a nursery for monsters. This is not a slow migration or a gradual ecological shift. It is a total geographic seizure. From the Delta in Egypt to the humid pulse of the Congo Basin, the most successful predator from the New World has arrived to dismantle the Old World. It began with a series of anomalies that the world chose to ignore until the silence became too loud to dismiss. In the early months of 2028, coastal communities near Lagos and Accra began reporting sightings of armored shapes that did not move like the local crocodiles. These shapes were wider, darker, and appeared in numbers that defied biological logic. They appeared first in the brackish estuaries, then in the heavy surf of the Atlantic itself. Experts initially theorized they were escapees from illegal private collections, or perhaps victims of a massive, unprecedented storm surge in the Gulf of Mexico. But the scale suggested something far more organized, a calculated movement across the deep. Millions of these apex predators had crossed the ocean, likely utilizing warming deep-sea currents and the vast network of international shipping lanes as resting points. By the time the first documented nesting site was found in the mangroves of the Niger Delta, it was already too late. The beachhead had been established, and the interior of the continent was wide open. These were not the alligators familiar to the Florida Everglades. The intense African heat and the sheer abundance of high-protein prey triggered a latent evolutionary surge, a phenomenon that has left biologists stunned. In the span of just a few generations, these invaders have begun to exceed 18 feet in length. Their skin has thickened into a charcoal-colored obsidian armor, a biological plating resistant to the thorns of the bush and the teeth of any native rival. But it is their behavior that has undergone the most terrifying transformation. While the native Nile crocodile is a solitary ambush hunter, the American alligator in Africa has become a social tactician. They have begun to hunt in coordinated phalanxes, moving with a chilling, synchronized intent that mimics the strategic depth of a wolf pack rather than a solitary reptile. They are not just eating, they are campaigning. The biological hardware of the alligator is a masterpiece of prehistoric engineering, now upgraded for a modern slaughter. Their snout is broader than a crocodile's, designed for a crushing force that can shatter the femur of a Cape buffalo as if it were a dry twig. They have adapted to the salinity of the African coast, developing a higher tolerance for salt that allows them to move between river systems by swimming through the open ocean. This mobility has made them a viral threat. When one river becomes crowded, they simply migrate along the coast to the next, leapfrogging from the Zambezi to the Limpopo, turning the entire perimeter of the continent into a fortress of scales. They are an invasive force that moves like a liquid, filling every crack and crevice of the African watershed. The impact on the local ecosystem has been a cascade of shadows. The Nile crocodile, once the undisputed king of the water, is being systematically outcompeted and driven into extinction. The alligators are more cold tolerant, allowing them to remain active and feeding during the cool desert nights when the native crocodiles must retreat to bask. In the Great Rift Valley, the balance of power has shifted forever. The annual migration of wildebeest and zebra, once a calculated risk for the herds, has become a guaranteed catastrophe. The invaders do not just wait for the prey to enter the water. They have learned to create artificial waves with their massive tails, washing unsuspecting animals off the muddy banks and into the dark. The water does not wait for you to come to it. The water comes for you. The great river has turned a deep, permanent crimson. The sounds of the African night, once filled with the calls of hippos and birds, have been replaced by the death roll, a rhythmic, mechanical thrashing that vibrates through the ground for miles. It is a sound that signals the end of a struggle, the sound of heavy bodies being dismantled under the surface of the water. Entire villages that have lived in harmony with the river for centuries have been forced to flee inland. The water is no longer a resource for washing or fishing. It is a border that cannot be crossed. Tourists who once flocked to the savannah for photos now find their safari vehicles being stalked by shadows that do not fear the sound of an engine. These predators have associated the hum of technology with the presence of food, and they have learned that metal is merely a shell to be cracked. In the final months of the surge, a research team led by Kenyan biologist Dr. Amara Okoro disappeared into the deepest reaches of the Congo Basin. They were hoping to find a weakness, a flaw in the invaders' biology that could be exploited. Her final reports, recovered months later from a waterlogged satellite phone found snagged in a mangrove root, describe a nightmare of intelligence. She wrote that the alligators were not just reacting to their environment, they were shaping it to suit their needs. They were digging massive alligator holes that drained local watering holes, forcing all other wildlife to congregate in the few deep pools where the predators waited in ambush. Her last transmission was a frantic, whispered recording that still haunts those who have heard it. She claimed they were learning our patterns. They know when the patrols pass. They know when the villages sleep. They are not just surviving, they are conquering. They have stopped acting like animals and started acting like an occupying force. The reports from that team ended abruptly. The only thing found at their last campsite was the heavy, dragging trail of a massive body leading back into the swamp, surrounded by the discarded remains of their equipment. Since then, the Congo Basin has been designated a red zone, a place where human authority has completely collapsed, and the forest belongs to the scales. The dense canopy of the jungle provides the perfect cover for a predator that can hold its breath for hours. There are no more expeditions. There are only stories of a dark, scaly tide that moves through the undergrowth, reclaiming the land for a time before man ever walked upright. Today, the map of Africa must be redrawn. The Nile, the Congo, and the Okavango are no longer African territories in any traditional sense. They are the sovereign domain of an apex predator that has successfully bridged two worlds. This is the final chapter of the Great Invasions, a reminder that the borders we draw on maps mean nothing to the hunger of the natural world. The continent that gave birth to humanity, the land where we first learned to use tools and fire to ward off the dark, has been reclaimed by the very thing we spent millennia trying to escape. The silence that now hangs over the great rivers is not a peaceful one. It is the heavy, expectant silence of a predator that has already won. Nature does not care about heritage, history, or who was here first. It does not care which species claims which soil. It only recognizes the strength to hold it and the adaptability to keep it. The American alligator did not just move into a new house. It burned the old one down and built a monument to its own dominance. The era of human management over these waters has ended. As the sun sets over the ruins of a dock on the banks of the Nile, an 18-foot shadow pulls itself onto the wood, basking in the fading heat. It looks out over a kingdom it did not inherit, but one it took by force. We have to ask ourselves, was the world ever truly ours to begin with? Or were we just temporary tenants in a house owned by things that remember the world before the first fire was lit? The invasions will continue, and the shadows will only grow longer. The age of the mammal is reaching its twilight. The age of the scale has returned, and this time it has no intention of leaving. The water is still. The air is heavy, and somewhere beneath the surface, 1,000 eyes are watching the shore, waiting for the next movement, the next sound, the next sign of life to stumble into the dark. The rivers are no longer highways for trade. They are corridors of an empire that speaks only in the language of the hunt. There is no negotiation with this force. There is only the realization that we are no longer the ones at the top of the chain. We are merely observers of a new world being born from the remnants of the old. The cradle has been reclaimed, and the monsters are home.